Because within this freedom, Paul says, no, for Christ alone has set us free. You see, our spiritual growth is directly related to our ability to freely maximize our self-control and time with Christ in three primary areas. Number one, our time with Christ in prayer. Our time with Him alone. Our ability to be able to talk and to communicate. To be able to take His word and engage His truths, but allow them to engage us. To allow the opportunity we have to study the Scriptures, but to allow the Scriptures to transform us, to by grace adhere our hearts and affections and our abilities to lead to actions that please Christ. Thus, we then stand firm with character and integrity in our relationship with Him. Are we building these things in our lives? Are we standing upon these things? Are we planted firmly in prioritizing our time with Him? Our knowledge of Him? Our actions for Him? All of Christ, none of us. And since these Galatian believers are in Christ, they are free from the bondage of sin. They're free from the judgment of the law. And then they must stand firm in this freedom. It is this biblical truth that Paul now in verse 1 gives us another command in Galatians. As a result of this truth in Christ, we are to stand firm, therefore. Do not submit again to the yoke of slavery. Emphatically, keep your feet planted firmly in Christ, who has set you free. Because Christ has freed us objectively and technically and even legally from sin and its judgment. We are therefore to abide in this freedom. We're not to submit to this yoke of the law. You see, I'll remind you previously, Paul in Galatians 3:24 and Galatians 4:2 had referenced the law as this schoolmaster or this guardian. That before Christ, this law was this ruthless, overbearing lawkeeper. That it was one who kept us in this abyss from the Lord as a result of His holiness and justice as God. But now Christ has brought us to the Father. That as Christ the Son has become a curse for us, took what was meant for us, absorbed our judgment with His righteousness. We now see the law not as a foe, but as a friend. We now see the law not as this overbearing schoolmaster or guardian, but rather this gracious tutor that reminds us of the greatest need in our life is Christ. And it's this imagery that once again Paul builds upon. Stand firm. Do not submit again to this yoke of slavery. You see, in Jewish literature, the law was seen as a yoke, as an honorable sense, as one to aspire to. But Paul has a different sense here. He takes this agrarian term in his day of a plow, of a strong ox and a weak ox. In fact, I'll remind you, remember Jesus in Matthew chapter 11, in verses 28 through 30, took this same imagery where Jesus as the strong ox says, take my yoke upon you, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Paul uses this yoke in the same sense. This yoke is an imagery of an enslaved animal who has now been broken free, never to be enslaved again. You're free in Christ. Stand firm. Stay in His grace. Cling to His gospel because you are free.